Our Favorite Tool for Entrepreneurs podcast will address tools that are useful to startups and existing businesses. We will also cover other aspects of the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden. I'm Professor Gary Palin.
Yeah, and I'm Ryan Budden.
This podcast is valuable to entrepreneurs in both launch and growth modes.
That's absolutely right. We'll go over some tools, get you into hyper-growth mode. How can we see some hockey stick growth in your business?
Ryan, one of my favorite tools when looking at developing a business is the business model canvas, and I believe it's one of your favorites also.
Oh, it absolutely is. I start most of my consultancy gigs with the introduction of the business model canvas, so we can get a really deep understanding of what's going on, what are the key objectives, and what does the future look like.
And one of the overarching perspective of a business model canvas, I view it as really how are you going to monetize this venture? And it's a simple way on one page that you can put that strategy together.
That's exactly right. The 10,000-foot flyover. I mean, the two biggest sections of the business model canvas across the bottom are cost structure and revenue stream. So really bringing to the forefront how this is going to be profitable.
And I also find that it's much easier to discuss the overall concept using that structure of the canvas. Like, say, for example, if you're presenting to an investor, those are key issues they'll be looking for.
That's exactly right.
So why don't we jump into the components of the business model canvas? Or do you mind describing for someone who's never seen it exactly what it is and what it looks like?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So the business model canvas is just a single piece of paper that breaks down the facets of an organization or a company. It's a free tool that's published on the internet. So just type in business model canvas and you can get a copy of it that you can either print on an A4 sheet of paper. I really like to write it out on a whiteboard so you can erase and move things around on it or stick sticky notes up in each one of those columns. But yeah, a single sheet of paper that breaks down the facets of a business so you can see it in one consolidated place and dive deeper into each one of them as you go forwards.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned a whiteboard or sticky notes because the idea is what you originally write will change
exactly
as you develop
right.
it further.
As you go through the categories, you typically end up pulling things around, or somebody has an idea. You end up with a huge column of ideas to the left or right, bottom, however you're organizing yourself as you go through.
Okay, so bottom line, it's not written in stone. It's meant to be flexible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about just the components of it. Do you mind talking about how you use key partners?
Yeah, so key partners is the top left, I think, for a reason. It's typically where you start, and I often find when I'm going through this that the key partner is a key to the idea generation of the business. You learned something about a business that you know about, or a tangential business that you are interested in. And that's what spurred the idea of what you're doing. So how I typically use it is not only where you are and who you're partnering with now. So that could be anything from suppliers, how are you getting raw materials, how are you getting the goods or the ingredients to the service that you're providing, but also who could be the key integral players for growth. Is there somebody that could represent a partnership that's a milestone to move you forwards or to really accelerate your business?
And one of the areas that I see people will miss out on, which is, I believe, a great place for startup ventures, is strategic alliances.
Yeah, absolutely. Who represents the common interest for you?
Yeah, if you can negotiate a partnership with someone that, say, for example, has name brand recognition, and create the alliance with them and leverage that brand, that saves you hundreds of thousands of dollars in branding, for example.
Yeah, I see that a lot with startups partnering with, especially people that have large presences on social media. So people that have established a following, partnering with them if they have a specific interest to really bring your product or service to a wide audience pretty immediately.
Yeah, so I would definitely look long and hard, and don't just look at key partners as who the team members are.
That's exactly right. Although that is a very important part of it as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. What about the area? I'll just go along the line on how it's laid out on the canvas. Key activities.
Yeah, so the key activities I view really in the 10,000-foot zoomed out fashion, what are you doing? If you had to explain this to a 3-year-old in terms that they would understand, what value are you providing, whether it's a good or a service, break it down super simplistically. And then for the rest of the business model canvas, you can get a little more detailed, but it's a good idea to keep it simple so you understand that you're not getting pulled in too many different directions.
Yeah, that's using the KISS theory.
Keep it simple, stupid, right?
Get that right. You know, I use, you mentioned, can you explain it to a child? I use the grandmother litmus test. Can I explain it to my grandmother and she understands what I'm talking about?
There we go. A little hard with technology sometimes, but yeah, absolutely.
It's actually with the technology businesses, I think it's critical to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you get too techie geeked out and not everyone will understand what you're talking about because they don't speak that language. But if you can simplify it and explain it in the common vernacular, that goes a long way. And it also helps develop your elevator pitch. Yeah,
absolutely. I think this whole business model canvas is a great place to start for a pitch.
Absolutely. Okay, next section would be key resources. How have you used key resources? What's your viewpoint on that?
So key resources are I really break it into two things, depending on whether you're a goods and sales business or a service-based business. If you're a sales business, so you're selling a tangible product, where are those products coming from? How are you manufacturing them? What does that process look like? And if it's a service, what sort of intellectual property do you hold? How are you making sure that in the long run you're protecting that service that you're offering?
And it's interesting you mentioned the tangible goods of manufacturing, because that's become a very important issue in today's environment with supply chain issues that we're facing.
Yeah, huge. Can you diversify where those goods and services are coming from, and how secure do you really believe that they are?
Yeah, I've seen people that have just one source of supply. Going way back, I had purchased a product that I was selling in a retail store, and we couldn't get it in. And I traced it down, and the ship that was sending them over sank.
Oh my goodness! Yeah,
and I made the mistake of only having one source of supply.
Yeah. I often see people bringing up inventory in this aspect as well. How much inventory are they holding? So, what is it just-in-time inventory where they're keeping a small amount in-house, or are they backlogging items so that they make sure they have enough to distribute? That or drop shipping is now a huge aspect of this as well. Are you using a major drop shipper?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're using a drop shipper too, that'll save you a lot of cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned on the tangible side, the IP, that's an issue that people get very confused about.
They do. And so I interact surprisingly a lot with pretty mature businesses that haven't really sat down and thought about how are they protecting their intellectual property, and what intellectual property do they own?
And it's not just the fact of setting up the protection, but is it defensible?
Right.
Because you have, say, for example, patent trolls out there that can cause all types of problems, and they'll show up when you're successful.
Sure. Yeah. I view a lot of that stuff as just the basic, barrier to protection. Have you at least registered a trademark? Do you own various URLs around what you're doing?
Right. Let's talk about value propositions, because to me, that's any critical component of a startup is, are you providing value? And you're providing value to a specific target market. And if you're not creating value, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And since we've brought up pitches and elevator pitches, this is really what are you doing that's interesting? What are you doing that's different to the market or different from your competitors?
Yeah, the point of differentiation is very interesting, very important in your value proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of people will do what I call a Me Too business. It's like the one just down the street, and I akin that to a shin kicking contest. I'll say shin very slowly, because even if you win, it hurts like hell.
Yeah, there we go.
don't want to get into one of those contests where I'm just repeating what's being done down the street. So what is that point of differentiation is critical.
Yeah, where are you innovating?
And also, I always like to look at too is can people easily replicate that value? Because then that makes you position. You might get a quick start, but if someone, say, with deeper pockets comes in and can replicate that value, and they have more resources to attack the market, yeah, you can go in a downward spiral.
Yeah, I think barriers to entry is a big part of that. And are you bringing some sort of expertise from either a previous career or some part of academia that you've gone through that can get you over a barrier to entry that then turns into a value proposition to your customers?
Exactly. Okay, what about customer relations? What's your perspective on customer relationships?
So I think that this is the big difference in old school businesses versus new school businesses.
Now, you're saying old school. Were you looking directly at me with that?
Hey, you have some perspective that I don't. We'll put it that way. I think that this is becoming intensely important in new businesses. What are you doing to directly engage with your customers, not just sit behind the business and push to a customer audience? And even workflow methodologies like Agile are there's an intense focus on bringing the customer into development processes, whether that's a good or a service.
Yeah, and I think if you talk about the marketplace of today versus when I was starting out, one of the difficulties is managing. There are so many different platforms to communicate with the consumer. Yeah. Where in the past you're talking about magazines, newspapers, TV, radio. And maybe there were others, billboards, I say, but today there's hundreds, if not thousands, and which ones to use and how to use those is a challenge.
Yeah, I consult with a lot of businesses that are using them all, and therefore using none of them. It's an onslaught of feedback that they're getting that they can't really quantify or qualify to make quality results come out of it.
Yeah, we've had some interesting discussions on the use of social media for startups and the value of social media, and that'll be a future podcast. But that's something to consider. It
certainly is. Yep.
Okay, how about channels? Channels will be the next section.
So channels, we were just talking about social media could be a channel. So channels are the direct flows in which you engage with people you're working with, customers you're selling to, distributors that you might be buying from. What are those information flows? The veins coming out of the heart of the business. What's bringing things backwards and forwards for you?
Yeah, exactly. It's again, yet I keep saying they're all critical, but they are all critical, which is the purpose of the business model canvas. How about customer segments?
So customer segments is probably the most technical aspect of the business model canvas. So a lot of time, what I see people going into is we're selling to the United States. And that's their customer segment because they're selling some sort of widget, we'll say, or some sort of service that's applicable to a large population. And I often find that people are very challenged when they have to really focus on the segments aspect of that customer segments. Who are they actually going after? And a lot of marketers will call this a persona. So can you define that exact person? And then how do you orientate marketing, sales, interactions around who that exact person you're going after is? And once you know who you're going after, can you quantify that? How many of John Does are there that are actually a target for you?
I always cringe when I ask someone who their customer is, and they say everyone is our customer.
Yeah.
And we've discussed a number of times. It's if every citizen of China bought our product once, we would make, and that's just not a realistic customer segment.
Yeah, and you can get into adoption rates. I always I advise a lot of people on adoption rates, but there's some pretty widely accepted numbers out there for various industries. So if you ever want to just have a quick multiple, just type adoption rate in the industry you're targeting, and there will be some sort of multiplier that you can divide out.
Yeah, and I see people get confused with the market and the addressable market.
Yeah.
Because
exactly
and
right.
they very often will like to talk about the total people, say, using smartphones. And that would be the market. But that's not it's who specifically are they using, say, for a particular app. They're not targeting every person using a smartphone. So there's an addressable market that's a subset of that total market.
Yeah, and being realistic here, I want to make sure that this business model canvas, although it could be used externally, I guess, is really an internal thing. So being hyper realistic with yourself is going to lead to a lot better results. This is not the area where you need to hype yourself up or to hype somebody else up on what you're doing.
Yeah, that's that would be akin to lying to yourself.
Yeah, but anytime people go through these processes, we all do, we all do have a tendency to affirm ourselves in what we're doing and try and put the biggest number or fudge the calculation a little bit, knowing that it's going to lead to a better result for you at the end.
Yeah, that's something you want to be straightforward and be realistic, because otherwise you're wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, business model canvas can be lead to the decision not to launch the venture.
Yeah, yeah. You go through one of these segments and realize, I'm not sure about this. You find out that one of your key partners is actually a direct competitor.
That's right, with much deeper pockets than you have. That can be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It might not be a deal breaker, but you better come up with a means to address the problem.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's get into the cost structure. How do you use cost structure?
Yeah, so the cost structure is, how are you pricing things out? So it looks very different based on different businesses, products, services, web-based models. But think very critically about what are the inputs to your business. So what are the personnel costs? What are the hosting costs? How everything builds into the end result of what you're charging somebody else.
Yeah, and controlling those costs and being lean and mean it can be very effective. Mm-hmm. But I see sometimes people will think that they have to spend quite a bit of money up front on areas that don't directly impact their sales, because they want to look like a business, act like a business.
Sure.
And that makes your funding much more difficult. Your break-even point is much higher as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't act like a startup. They want to go into straight mature business mode before they figure out, what's the core basics of what they need to get a sellable product across the line.
And I drive my accountant crazy, because he's always saying we've got to reduce cost, and I break it up into two areas. One is sales generating cost, and the other is a non-sales generating cost. If I'm generating profitable sales, I want to increase that cost. So we would always debate that. And I would say, well, let me find a non-sales generating cost that I can cut. I says, accounting fees, let's cut that.
I'm sure that's exactly what I wanted to hear, right?
Yes, but I got my message across to him.
Yeah, you find a lot of people using the terms fixed costs and variable costs. So what is a fixed cost? Rent per month. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. You have a space. It would only ever leap if you downsized or increased. And then I think the other classic one is, electricity. If you're working 24 hours a day with a machine, it's going to cost more if you're working 8 hours a day with a machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and the last one, but not the least important one, is revenue streams.
Yeah. So revenue streams is the opposite. We just talked about cost, which is, coming into you. This is input coming back to you. So what are you charging for? How much are you charging for that? And are there upsells, tangential services, other ways of making money with your product or service.
Yeah, and an area that I see people making mistakes on the pricing on the revenue flow is they try to have a low cost strategy, and that's a difficult one because there's always someone going to be coming along that will compete on a lower price. Whereas especially what I hear is we're going to have the highest quality and the lowest price, and that's just a conflicting statement to me. Because if I'm having the highest quality, then I would expect people to pay a higher price.
Yeah. And then if you get into the low cost model, you're competing with Walmart.
Yes. And I always try to avoid the low cost. Not that you can't have a successful business, but to me, it's more difficult.
Absolutely.
Yes, so,
in most businesses I go after, I'd rather have the number of people I'm working with and double the price and make the same amount of money. A big part of the conversation I find myself having here is projected revenue streams as well. So technology-based businesses, customer information is worth more than gold, right? That's what you hear over and over again. Well, that isn't immediately true. When you have one piece of customer information, it's worth nothing. It's only when you have thousands of pieces or thousands of customers that then becomes part of the equation. So making sure you're being realistic. You're not factoring in 5 years down from now, a year down from now into what you're actually going to be able to turn into a revenue generating activity immediately.
I agree. Well, so that's the essence of a business model canvas. And I highly encourage anyone that's looking to start a venture, as that would be their primary starting point.
Absolutely. I think it's really eye-opening. And once you get into it, you could really take each one of these parts of the business model canvas and truly expand into a huge part of a discussion.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for the conversation, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to our favorite tools for entrepreneurs, hosted by Professor Gary Palin and Ryan Budden. We trust you enjoy our deep dive into topics assisting in the launch and growth of your entrepreneurial venture. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out all the resources and courses designed to assist entrepreneurs. If you haven't already done so, please follow this podcast on our Spotify and YouTube channels, allowing you to keep abreast of our podcast releases in a timely manner. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.